Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 6 of Hear Her Roar. Rach and I are back in the studios this afternoon after the bye last week, and we have a huge episode for you. The head of women's football at the West Tigers. So Charmain comes with a multiple perspectives on women's sport as an elite athlete, an executive, and now, as I said, the head of women's football for our beloved West Tigers. So Charmain, thank you and welcome to Hear Her Roar.
Oh, thank you both for having me.
Thank you for coming in.
And hi, Rach. How are you today?
Thanks, Kel.
What jersey do you have on today, Rach?
I've got last year's Indigenous jersey on. We beat Manly and Moore Park.
And it's your favourite, isn't it?
My favourite Indigenous jersey. I do love the Indigenous jerseys that come out.
Yeah, I've dug into the archives again with my 2018 Marvel jersey. So the War Machine, I think this one is. And shout out to Troy. I didn't know who Rocket Raccoon is, and I really don't know who War Machine is either.
No, you're just asking me.
All I remember was Marty Supau was the face of the Marvel jersey that year and then left. But anyway, that's another story. Charmain, let's get into finding out a little bit more about you. So again, thank you for joining us. You have had such an interesting journey through elite sport, business, and now the world of rugby league leadership. Can you tell us a little bit about how it all began and what led you to where we are today?
Good question. So it started, my love for sport started off as an 8-year-old young girl growing up in the very far north of New Zealand. And we all sort of were raised on a diet of the All Blacks and rugby. Mm-hmm. And most kids sport was just everyday life. We played predominantly in the rain. I felt like, 11 months was raining growing up. And, when we were training or playing, we were generally on paddocks. So there wasn't any cones or any markings or flags. It was pretty raw. So that was really where, that's really where I started. And then as I got older, I started, I did a bit of sort of individual sport for a while, and then I sort of stumbled into a sports team, and from there I really enjoyed just being a part of a team, and then realised that I had a real passion, not just for competing, but playing for someone more than myself. So that's really where I and it was an escape as well. Mm-hmm. There wasn't much to do where I sort of grew up, so it was I think for a lot of us it was a place that we could just go and be ourselves and do something that we were really passionate about.
Yeah, nice.
Which I can actually relate to growing up in the country in
Yes.
Australia.
Yeah.
Again, there was very limited pathways,
Yeah.
very little to do, and your life revolved around sport on the weekend.
Yes, that's right.
Every weekend out there watching your brothers or your cousins or you playing and participating. So,
no, it is. It's very different to what my daughters have access to now, and I constantly sort of think about the people that were a part of my journey, and particularly those females that were coaching, and we didn't have uniforms, and there was absolutely no high performance by any means, and everything was very, very unstructured, but there were definitely people who were really passionate about providing opportunities for us. And, those are people that certainly I reflect on now, and how we were, really didn't have very much either. Yeah. So it certainly had left a long-lasting impact on me.
Lovely. Mm. You represented Australia at a time when women's sport looked, very different to what it is today. Looking back now, do you realise you were helping lay foundations for future athletes?
Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. We were just trying to survive.
Yeah.
We were trying to hold down full-time jobs. We were trying to train, travel, exhausting all of our annual leave every single year, and being paid what would be would be sort of a per diem. So it wouldn't even been enough to really cover lunch, and that's what we were given to sort of to compensate, I guess. So we were in saying all of that as well, and going into a camp or an Australian team, we had no way near the resources that we assemble now for our NRLW program. So and the equality that we now see to provide a full-time environment for these part-time athletes. So and I had no idea, and I think that's really one of the reasons why my generation of athletes, of female athletes. There are so many of us that are really committed to making sure that those standards continue to lift, and equally those opportunities are given. So, it's really, so I don't think, we certainly weren't thinking about that at the time. We were just trying to get through, one day and work and try and somehow find a way to get to those tournaments. And some of them were World Cups, which, most times now that would be paid for.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case. So there was a lot of fundraising going on and,
a few chocolate boxes.
Yeah, yes. So it looks, so it's very, very different. And, and these are Australian teams, so quite different to what's available now, what the landscape looks like.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you grew up in New Zealand. So when did you actually move to Australia?
When I was 19. So
19.
My family moved over and I sort of refused to come. So I was pretty stubborn. So mum and dad moved over with my sisters and then after a year of my poor best friend and living with their family, I decided that was it. If I can't beat them, join them. So coming over here and I guess, again, just going back to those basic, I guess that tribalism, find a team and that's what I did. I found a team, a footy team pretty quickly, and one of those players was Tasha Gale that I spent my very first year with, Lisa Fiola, who's Barbie, and Ruan Sims. So I was very quickly, started, doing what I knew was, things that I loved, being a part of a team, and then and from there that quickly then translated into representative teams, and then I was on a flight to Hong Kong playing for the Australian Sevens. Yeah. So that was sort of my debut, and and then from there I back then too. Now the Australian Sevens, they have a World Series, so they're currently in France and that they're travelling 6 months of the year. And when we played, there was only one location, and that was Hong Kong, which was amazing. And I thought that was
bee's knees,
I thought I'd arrived. I thought I was living my best life going to Hong Kong. So, and it's just so different now, but. Again, there's a lot of self-sacrifice that went into being able to perform at that particular tournament. But it certainly holds, it was really, it's the birthplace of rugby sevens, Hong Kong, and so to be a part of that was really special. But it was very looking back now at that group of players that I was either playing with or against, pretty grateful. Yeah,
no, as I said, that was a pretty amazing cohort of women who are sort of trailblazers for rugby league in Australia, and still very much heavily involved in the sport. But you sort of after I'm not sure if it was after or still during your rugby union career, you moved into sort of a business role and into leadership. What lessons from elite sport, being an elite sportswoman, still influence your leadership style and how you lead today?
Yeah, and I think it was a necessity to have to work because we weren't being paid. So, and for me, it was, I very quickly knew that I had to carve out a career, and really, I guess I ended up in sort of that, HR and org development, and there was just the synergies between building a team, whether it was on the field or in business. It just become something that just become very natural to me. So, and I, for 20 years was on that corporate ladder. So with Toyota and with, Westpac and St. George, and, so in very corporate roles. And I, that was a very deliberate choice because I didn't really want to move into sport for a very long period of time. And I guess it hasn't probably been until I've been in this role that I have really harnessed, I guess, that high performance, that high performance background, because I've been leaning in so heavily on my corporate role. And I guess for me, everything I've learned from a high performance perspective has come from sport, but everything about people has come through my corporate roles, and I guess where I currently sit, that where those two intersect is where I sit as a leader. So And I guess when I sort of took this role on last year, or when it was sort of presented to me by Richo, at the time I really wasn't sure what this looked like. I'm the first female in this role in any club. Okay. And he had that vision and belief about what we needed as a club, and he understood at a very basic level what I'd been doing, and I guess it was, at that point I realised everything I'd learned from not just being an athlete, but even as a coach. I've spent the last 10 years coaching all the junior footy teams, and I've been on a board and being inducted into the Hall of Fame. All of those different experiences, I guess, have led me to this point. And he could see that I was able to view this entire, not just the NRLW, but the entire ecosystem of the women's program at West Tigers, not just through the lens of an athlete, but through the lens from a corporate perspective. As well. So how do we make this a sustainable program? And how do we sort of, the results will come, but what does that look like? How do we get there and align it with the rest of the club? So, as you're aware, Richo was pretty instrumental in terms of making some pretty fundamental changes at the club, which is the reason why I came to work with him and for him, was for that very reason, and had the courage to do what a lot of people haven't done. And through that process, he was very clear about making sure that this program isn't just, a part-time activity or some side hustle, that it was integrated into West Tigers, and there was a planning that was put, a long-term plan put in place, so it was a sustainable program, and and the investment in our pathways and in female coaches and building leaders, and building infrastructure around the program. So we're not just designing it for today, but it's for the future. So that's really what my focus is, is on every single day, is about what does this look like in 5 years. So for that next Ruan Sims, that next Charmain Steventon, and that next sort of, Tasha Gale, who's coming through our junior pathways. So that's kind of where, I guess, that journey and where we currently sit.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and it's a
beautiful segue.
A beautiful segue, because Rach is going to talk a little bit about pathways and lead into some questions about how we're building our pathways at the moment.
So over the last few podcasts, we've been talking a lot about our Tasha Gale and Elisa Viola, and we're very excited to have 4 of our girls represent the City Under-17s a few weeks ago. Isabella Brown, Olivia Large, Dawn Tui, Kiana Munro. And, they won 28-10 victory, which is fantastic. And it was so good to see Dawn Tui get the player of the match.
Yes.
To go out there. She's such a good little player. I was sitting there watching her in awe of her at such a young age, and her leadership and her ability to direct the team around the park.
Yep.
On that, they've both, obviously, the Tasha Gale and Elisa Viola made the finals this year. So that's a credit to our pathways and what's being embedded in there. So as head of women's football, what does success actually look like at the West Tigers?
It's and I sort of touched on it earlier, success isn't just about the results. It won't just be around wins and losses. As I mentioned, part of what we're building is a 5-year roadmap, and it's a plan, to have a sustainable program. And what does that look like? And certainly, and pathways, and that's something that I'm sure we'll have a chat, more about later on. But the pathways is absolutely critical. And one of the things Richo and I spoke about was our NRLW will never be successful unless we invest in the generation coming behind it. So we've got 2,000 girls in all of our local clubs. 1,200 of them play tackle. We've got 100 females that are involved in some sort of coaching or coaching capacity. So we've got, again, not dissimilar to the men's either. Yeah. We've got an enormous catchment area, and we've got girls that are there. So it's about making sure that we've got eyes on those players and we're actually developing them. So pathways aren't just about players playing in a competition. It is about it's got to be a development program. We have to be developing them. So we've made it really clear with Sandy, from an NRLW all the way down to our younger ages, is having that coaching philosophy that is cascaded all the way down. So we want to make sure that as girls are coming through the system, that by the time they do get into reserve grade and then NRLW, that they've all got that same fundamental understanding of how an NRLW West Tigers player plays, what that looks like. And we want to develop our own style, our own identity. It doesn't need to be like the NRL team because we're different. So that for us is that's really important, is building that identity for our players. So whenever you see a female player, you know that that's a West Tigers player by the way that they play, and you can tell by the way that they train, and you can tell by the way they execute the moves, and there'll be, over time, there'll be that, there'll be that real clear, I guess, that sort of coaching philosophy that'll be evident in the way that our girls play. So, but certainly very proud of, the girls and certainly, and Dawn, look, she'll be, we've signed her for the next few years. She'll be a development player for the NRL, and then no doubt, and then she'll be in our top 24. So, she's a big, she's in our plans over up until we've sort of mapped out our roster over the next 5 years, and she's a very impressive little player. Yeah, she is, and her sister plays at Para. She is someone that we are very excited about having and also developing her, which is what Sandy is. This is one of the reasons why he is going to is having will have such a big impact on our playing group, is because that's what he does. He develops and he coaches. And I think a lot of the girls where we find where the men have been playing since they were 5 or 6, and then, a lot of the females that are even in our NRLW team, they only started playing 4 or 5 years ago. So, the biggest thing Sandy and I have noticed is just that footy IQ is not there, not at the same depth. But then we've got these players like Dawn and, we've got all these younger players coming through who've been playing since they were little. So that coupled with obviously that coaching, that real love for fundamentals and building the Tigers way, when they do get up to the NRLW, they'll be ready to go. So, we don't have to start again, which is what we've had to do every year. Particularly when you get girls or players that aren't in your catchment area. It's hard, which is what we've had to do. So, which is one of the challenges with, I guess in terms of rostering, and if you're not really buying into those pathways, you're contracting players from other clubs,
the contract
other states,
system
other
up until recently meant that players could only contract for a short period of time. So there was a lot of chopping and changing. Now with the ability to sign players for longer terms, it does allow for that.
Yeah, and I think clubs also really investing in the players as well. I'm not interested in signing a player for 1 year. We really want that stability and that cohesion, and we understand how important it is. If we're chopping and changing every year,
where do combinations come from? How do you build up?
That's right. It resets everything. So. So it's. I think having that vision that's really clear for the playing group is important, and getting them to buy into that so they can see what that longer term plan looks like. And the wins, like I said, the wins will come, and we want to set up our entire system so that when we do succeed, we can then be consistent, because that's probably one of the failings of a lot of teams and businesses is, hope isn't a strategy. You can't just hope that you're going to get there. And if sometimes you do, but then what happens the following season? It's very difficult to replicate that. So for us, for me certainly, it's everything we do is very intentional, and it's all designed, and it's very, very methodical. And then and again, things are going to happen, and we're going to have to adjust and adapt. But that's the great thing about our program. We're very lean and very agile, so we can adjust very quickly. But having everyone that's part of that program, making sure they're really clear on what we're trying to achieve this year, and then what that looks like in 5 years' time is really important.
You mentioned that, there's that consistency along the pathway is really important. We've just said, Rach has just said that Lisa Fiola and Tasha Gale have already finished.
Yes.
We're only in week 3 of preseason for NRLW. Harvey Norman isn't now until the NRLW season as well. So how do you sort of maintain that consistency when the seasons don't necessarily align, like with the NRL where you've got 4 grades that are all playing roughly the same season?
Yeah, it's really tricky, and it's tricky from a couple of optics as well. A lot of the people that we have volunteering are sometimes across both programs as well, which always worries me because there is that, you're expecting a lot from people too. And I think the gap too, that there is a bit of a gap between, but with the under 17s, they also need the break. Yeah. It's a lot. Mm-hmm. These young ladies are training 3 times a week and then playing. We ask a lot of them, so it's very intense. And then with the under 19s, they've already rolled straight into New South Wales Women's Premiership training. Dawn, there were a couple of those players. Obviously, we managed her load, but they had an internal trial last Friday. They'll have another trial against the Knights on Sunday, but they've rolled straight into that group. Right. So there's been again, for some of the rep players, we've obviously just managing their load and watching them very closely. But they've gone straight into that training. That they've gone straight into that sort of reserve grade, which is wonderful. So they actually start playing a few weeks earlier than the NRLW. They start playing next month, so their season does start a little bit earlier. So there's not that much of an actual gap between.
So those older pathways. Girls that are ready for that next level are getting that continuity,
which is exactly what we want them to be doing. They want to be playing footy, and we also want to see how they also how they sort of play, how they perform at that level and how they train and how do they just conduct themselves too with that group. So we ran with the Premiership. We ran for the first time in history a combine back in January. So we ran a combine for that team, which was everyone said, "Why would you do it?" And and it was extraordinary. It was the best thing we've done. And through that process, obviously, we've now got a squad of around 30 players. And again, in order for our NRLW team to be strong, that reserve grade
has to be.
We've seen that with the NRL side this year. That, when things go wrong, you need those players that can step up.
Yeah, that's right. So we've invested heavily into that program. We've aligned it in terms of resourcing, in terms of even facilities, keeping them close to our NRLW. Our season launch next week, we're going to launch both teams together, which I think is really important. If we're going to get, if the girls, they aspire to be NRLW players, let's make them feel, that they're part of the, our women's program. So those things are really important to me. So I think we've certainly seen, in the past that team's been, we probably haven't, in terms of resourced it appropriately, we've been very stretched as well in the past, but now we've got a full dedicated team around. And we don't have a crossover between NRLW and reserve grade, where before we had them, we had sort of resources stretched across both, which is really hard, especially when you're playing on the same day. So again, it wouldn't happen with Cup and NRL. So, so that's really important that we gave it the resources that it deserves, and we gave it the same amount of attention. So, it's been really encouraging to see those young girls and thriving up there as I've been watching them. So they don't look out of place whatsoever. So that again, and through that process, Sandy's at their trainings. We go into camp this weekend. So NRLW team go into camp tomorrow. So we won't. I'll kind of come back and try and watch the back end of that trial game. But Sandy's at their trainings. He's well aware of who's who in the zoo, and that visibility is really important for them too. So they know that they're training not just for that team, and some may only play at that level. But we are absolutely we want to be seeing players come through that reserve grade into NRLW.
Fantastic. So we touched a bit on this already, but how different are the opportunities for young girls entering rugby league now compared to when you were playing?
Oh, wild! It is. Every day when I walk in to that facility, to West Tigers, I am, what an absolute privilege
It's amazing,
I have,
isn't it?
and I'm constantly, and it's probably a bit my kids, I don't think they understand how lucky they are. But what a privilege it is to work in that facility and have access. So, even now, sometimes it's really easy to get caught up about what we don't have rather than focusing on what we do have, which is just extraordinary. And, I think, maybe I'm a bit old school, but sometimes the ivory tower doesn't make you any better either. So all the shiny things don't always make you run faster or focus any better. So I think there is that element of sometimes you have to scrape everything back and just go back to why you're here. And we're here to play footy. So it's, there are a lot of key differences in terms of obviously contracting is as a start. The fact that, but may not be full time, they'll get there. Yep. So it'll probably be a gradual process. But, the fact that they're able to, be paid for a portion of the year and just focus on training is just it's pretty incredible. Yeah. The resourcing we put around them, we've got a female qualified physio, which again is really important when you are particularly when you've fallen pregnant, because it means for those players that they don't have to go and find their own female physio.
They've got
a special physio in-house. So again, something when I was pregnant, I wish I had access to, and it was probably one of my biggest regrets going back to sport so early and not understanding the ramifications. So that was really important to me, that we had people around our players that could help educate them through that process of when they were pregnant and obviously when they return as well. So having a physio who's qualified, a female qualified physio is certainly something that, and along with having a full-time head of high performance, having a coach, a full-time head coach who just is there to coach is absolutely, you don't even see that in an Australian level in some of the codes. So, those are, for me are just game changers. And then there's obviously all the other things in terms of the club support as well. I come, particularly from a rugby perspective, it's a very different ecosystem out there. So you've got the club support, you've got obviously the state support through New South Wales Rugby League, and then you've got the NRL support, and there was just so many things like the rookie camp that we had 6 of our players attend last weekend. That's an outstanding program for young female athletes. And, all of those different resources, as well as, our wellbeing and education resources that we have, all of our mental health, which they do, the NRL do an incredible job, I think, compared to some of the other codes, to support players and staff as well we're a lot further down the track. In fact, some of the organisations probably need to take a leaf from that book.
Their pregnancy policy is quite comprehensive. Like we unpacked it in an earlier podcast.
It is, and it's there. And again, I know everyone's got an opinion on this, but my personal view is, as someone who's had children, if I had the opportunity to go back to go back and play and work in an environment where I was supported, and that was feasible. That would have been that would have been incredible, and that is absolutely my intention. Is they have all right to I'm not going to if they have to go and have children, it's the same as someone in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's absolutely their right, and I couldn't be more excited for Rick, who's returning after having twins, and just blows my mind. And also, obviously, and P and Jade, who are going off on this incredible journey. So I think, and I think everyone in that everyone in that team is just so grateful to be a part of their journey, and it's pretty. So in terms of from a contractual perspective, yes, the clubs are obviously we pay their contract, which I think is which again is a lot, probably a lot, certainly compared to some of the sort of maternity policies in a lot of businesses, it's a lot more it's certainly a lot more flexible and a lot more attractive than what you see in a lot of other companies. So, but I get it though too.
Yeah.
You know, you have a baby and then you think, oh my God, how are we going to pay for this?
Yeah.
Particularly when you're only part-time
Yeah.
as well. So, so I think looking after putting the player first is wonderful. And, you know, and as I say in every organisation, if you want something done, give it to a mum, you know, and they'll come back better, stronger. Every single, you know, everyone that I know that's come back to sport after having children, they are just incredible. You know, so and it's good for West Tigers. You know, I love it when I come in and I see the twins on the, you know, I see them, you know, being pushed around, or, you know, that's one of our values is family. So you know, if we're going to put that up, then we have to live that. And there is nothing better when you walk into the club and you see little kids or you see the twins and everyone, you know, kind of passing them around and you know, or pushing them, and it's you know, it's real, you know, and it's what we all have to do as mums as well, is take them to work. You know, not everyone can afford a nanny, or, you know, we don't all have people at home to help. So I think it really does, you know, I think it keeps everything very humble and very real as well, and we love it. Like you know, everyone in the club loves it when the twins are in, and, you know, so I think it's, you know, it definitely changes, I think, the entire club when, you know, you really start to embrace those, you know, not just have those policies, but, you know, really start to, you know, really live those values as well. And that's certainly, you know, that's definitely something I think really sets the club apart, is that particular value. Yeah.
Nice. Well, we might switch from the West Tigers now to Women's State of Origin, which it should be on everybody's mind since Game 3 is tonight. So it feels like this year's Women's State of Origin has taken it to another level. The crowd at Suncorp before Magic Round was huge. The TV ratings have been amazing. New South Wales, thankfully, have already sealed the series, but that means that tonight's game is going to be a big one for Queensland to try to put a little bit of pride back in their jersey. So it will be an interesting game tonight to see how it goes. But what stood out for you, coming from your perspective, from this year's Women's State of Origin in general?
Look, every year the players get faster. They're more confident and they're more skillful, regardless of the fact whether it's played before, you know, the season's started. But it's very evident. And I guess what I've probably noticed, again, probably from a rugby lens, is the kicking, how much that's improved. So Jess Southwell is just, you know, she's super impressive. And her composure in those moments for a young player is extraordinary. So that personally, I've really enjoyed just seeing that, you know, particularly just the general, whether it be the general kicking, how much that's improved, because that's probably been somewhere we've really been a long way behind. Not just at a State of Origin level, but even at a club level, we don't kick nowhere near as much. So yeah, that's definitely impressed me, and certainly Jess, I think, just from her, just her composure. She's
played a great Origin series so far.
Yeah, definitely.
So you've mentioned about Origin being played before the season starts. So what are your thoughts on that structure? What do you think needs changing, tweaking in order for that to be set up?
Look, I completely understand commercially how that's structured, and also from a competition and from a competition perspective as well. And I think as the competition continues to grow, there'll be discussions around you know, where is that best positioned, and not only from a player management perspective, particularly, you know, playing before the competition started and managing that, but also just from a quality. From a product perspective. So I think there'll be plenty of discussions around where are we best placed to have the State of Origin, and that will change, you know, as over the next couple of years as we get more teams, you know, the season gets longer. So there'll be, so I certainly think that'll be discussed.
Thanks, Dan. So our girl Kezzy is playing her 20th Origin game tonight. What does it mean to the West Tigers to have a player of Kezzy's calibre at the club?
I think it is. Look, she's remarkable. And, you know, she has this aura around her. which is, and it doesn't matter where she is. She never changes as well. She's got that consistency and high performance is just, she's so consistent with the way that she trains with the team, the way that she conducts herself. Immediately as soon as she walks into the room, any room, standards are lifted instantly. So when Kezi is there, and no doubt, no doubt, she'll be, she's definitely when after this game, and I think hopefully she will get all of the accolades that she deserves. We won't see another Kezi Apps for a while. No. She is I think to be able to play at that level, that consistently, and notwithstanding too that we didn't always have 3 games played each year. That's so to get to 20.
Yeah, it was 2016 was her first New South Wales cap.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah, so 10 years in that arena.
It's extraordinary. So, I think every day I pinch myself that, that Kezi Apps is, not only instrumental in our program, but she obviously is, she is part of our staff as well. She's part of the club and she's heavily involved in our pathways. So it is, we are all the better for having Kezi.
She's probably the best one for those young players coming through to look up to.
The amount of parents that have sort of approached me and just, have been somewhat starstruck and they realised who it was. And I just can't imagine having anyone give you a halftime chat, at your game than Kezi Apps. So, and her visibility is what sets her apart, and her humility.
She's very humble. Very.
We had Kezi at an ambush event last year, and she was phenomenal.
Yes.
Like the girls in the room, like that was probably the first event where we had a lot of younger girls turn up.
Yes.
Dragging their dads along to come and hear from Kezi, and she was more than happy to chat with each of them and have photos afterwards. And everybody said that was one of the best interviews that we've had at our events, and she's just a beautiful human.
I agree, and she is someone that you want to be like.
Yeah,
for every young girl, if you could, that's exactly, in terms of the way that she, sort of just, holds herself, her values, her morals, outside of, what she could do on the footy field. She is certainly someone that, you want young people to look up to, and we all want to be like Kezi. So
I'm actually going to jump a couple of questions, just I'm conscious of the time. I just don't want to miss out on too much. But before we move on to chatting about the men's game, I have one last question for you around women's rugby league, and you've mentioned this a couple of times that you've got a 5-year plan at place at the West Tigers. So looking ahead in 5 years, where do you see women's rugby league in general and women's rugby league at the West Tigers heading?
So moving towards that sort of full-time programming, that will, at what stage I'm not sure, but we'll certainly, by that stage we'll definitely be there. And with that though will come, there'll be expansion of teams, there'll be, longer seasons, investment of resources, and a big one, outside of, what we're already seeing with just, the viewership. So West Tigers, our NRLW team, is the second most viewed team in the entire competition next to the Broncos.
Wow. Didn't know that. That's great.
So, so that, for us is really, really positive, and gives us a really good platform to continue to grow from. So we'll see more investment. Hopefully, there will be some global expansion and opportunities. Yeah. That's probably the one area that I'd love to see that will rival rugby union, where it is a true global sport. We'll be giving the females opportunities to provide them, with those opportunities to play, and not just Gillaroos either. But what an opportunity if we could get, the girls playing their first round, overseas would be pretty cool. So, so we're certainly going to see, we're certainly going to see and invest in resources, and obviously from a commercial perspective as well, a much, in terms of that alignment with commercial partners, investment, and then also with community, with our community groups as well.
Fantastic. All right. let's have a little bit of a chat about the men's game now. So last night we had men's origin. The Blues typically don't have great success in Sydney, but they were able to get up over the Queensland side last night, coming back from a 20-0 deficit after 18 minutes, where I think all three of us were very much wondering what was going on. So, Charmain, I saw that you were at the game last night. I saw on your Instagram out in the rain. Well, you said you were undercover, luckily. But what was the atmosphere like at halftime versus when the full-time buzzer went?
It was a bit quieter at halftime, and there was certainly a few open jaws were on the ground. But regardless of that, there was this undeniable belief.
Yeah.
Which I don't think, which I think was always present, but certainly at that, I think at the very end, and even when Cleary kicked the ball, it took a while, I think, for when we were there. Maybe it was different watching it on TV, but it took a few seconds before we realised that he'd actually, stolen that ball and actually grounded it.
It was a bit like that watching it because of the angle. You sort of saw Teddy come down and fall over the line, but you didn't know whether he had the ball or what was going on.
So and then it erupted.
Yeah,
it was.
I can imagine.
Erupted. Yeah. And I think taking the kick as well, and then there was only sort of 3 seconds to go. Relief, I'd say, was probably the overwhelming, sort of, but it was just this eruption. Yeah. It was a pretty crazy moment.
Nice. Rach, I'll ask you, who impressed you the most last night?
For me, it was Ethan Strange. For a guy to come in and do what he's done on debut, to me, was outstanding. And he played well from the first minute of the game until the 80th minute of the game. Like that tackle he put on Munster in about the 23rd minute or 30th minute.
It sort of started to shift the momentum.
And then we went downfield and scored our first try from there. And he was just in every play. He had a score trying opportunity denied, but then he scored one of his own down the track. So I thought for a guy on debut, he looks so composed and he just looks like he's made for Origin.
He does. Yeah. Charmain, who stood out for you?
He competes at everything.
We just had to see what he had to do to score that try. He literally had to jump over three people in order to get the ball from Crichton and then still make his way to the try line.
Yeah, he was outstanding. Yep. I agree. And I think there must be, a lot of pressure too coming in, even on debut, right? Like you really want to get in there and do a good job. So, he was outstanding though. I agree. They certainly needed that energy that he brought in, both from a defensive perspective and an attack as well.
So it was a very close game. Did the results flatter either side?
Look, if it had been 13-13, I don't think New South Wales come over the top of Queensland. Queensland, yes, we started to wrestle back momentum, but Queensland was so dominant in that first 30 minutes. I don't know if we would have been able to peg back the amount of points that we gave them if we had 13-13. So perhaps the result did flatter us. Playing 13-12 was a massive advantage to us in that last 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's very difficult to defend. One short for that
long, and
for that period of time.
The game's played now as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it was very difficult.
Yeah, the 40-20 that Cleary kicked was a very clear indication of how 12-13 actually impacts because the fullback was the only one at the back and sort of Hammer was hanging very much towards the middle of the field. The wingers had to drop into the line in order to defend the line, so there was nobody at the back there to support the Hammer to sort of get that ball before it went over the line. And then I'm pretty sure it was the one or two plays after that 40-20 that we went in again. So
it was smart.
It was smart.
And that's what that's what Nathan Cleary does. And I'm not quite sure I agree with him being named man of the match, but he does, Nathan Cleary does Nathan Cleary things.
We wouldn't have won without him. Yeah. In that last 15 minutes. He was stellar in that last 15 minutes.
Yeah. Agreed. Yep.
So based on that, what changes do either side need to make for game 2? I'll go to you.
Look, outside of personnel changes, they just as we were talking about earlier, they can't start the same way. They can't start like that again. Otherwise, it's very difficult to chase the scoreboard.
Yeah, especially in Origin.
Absolutely. So I think they'll want to address that before the next game. It's a tricky one too, making wholesale or making any changes
as well.
It's really tricky, and that's when it goes back to that cohesion, right? You've got to trust the soldiers that you've put out there, and it's those 3 games you really So I don't know if they will make any changes.
I think the only one, Payne has to probably come back in.
You would assume so.
Yes.
Yeah, so he'll go back into the starting forward pack, and then Saifidi may drop off, who got no minutes anyway. But so that might be a bit of a change for the forward pack. But
was there any injuries?
Kola, obviously, but that would only really impact his club games. Olakawatu looked pretty rough.
Within the last
towards
10 minutes,
the end.
Yes.
But in saying that, again, there's 3 weeks between men's Origin. Is there compared to women's? I think, or is it 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah. I think we need to make a change to our forward pack. I think what was the stats with the starting forwards? I think in
the
total,
first 46 minutes, the New South Wales forwards, the starting pack, Aidan Fanua-Blake and Barnett made 33 metres.
Well,
which indicates why Queensland had so much of that momentum in that starting stanza.
Yeah, well, we couldn't get out of our half.
No. Well, the errors also didn't help with that either. We couldn't even get over the 30-metre line at some points. All right, let's talk about our boys, the West Tigers boys, heading into their round 13 clash on Saturday afternoon with the Bulldogs. We have a very different looking side to the side that took the field against Manly at Magic Round. So, Rach, we didn't get a chance to dissect that game, which is probably a good thing now that we think about it. So let's focus on what's ahead. So the bye definitely came at a good right time for us, with a number of players returning from injury this weekend. So Jareen Buller will be returning at fullback. Hamasi Makasini will be returning in the centres after a month on the sidelines. And breaking news today is he has also announced that he's committed to the club until the end of the 2029 season. So another huge signing that's taken place since the news of Jerome Luai moving on, which is just massive for the club. And also Mr. Reliable, Alex Twal, he'll be back in the number 13 jersey, which I'm very excited about. And that should dramatically help our go forward and our defence in the middle. But most importantly, and I know you are most excited about this, Rach, is Api Coruscant will be returning from suspension. And I think that's probably the biggest difference in this side. 3 weeks in a row missing him.
Seems like 3 months. Honestly,
it does. 3 quite significant losses in that time. We have really missed his leadership on the park, directing that middle of the field around, finding the markers, out of position.
And he's
taking those
little up football.
That's right, those little sneaky runs, getting his forwards onto the ball. So having Appy back doing things that only Appy Coruscant can do is very, very exciting. So this game is shaping up pretty much to be a must-win for us if we're wanting to stay in the hunt for the finals, because we then play Manly. We also play the Dolphins in a couple of weeks. So we've got a couple of games coming up where we're playing a group of top 8.
Yep.
But we also have a number of games in there that we're playing sort of teams below us at the moment. But coming into this game, what are you most looking forward to this game?
Well, Arby being back for starters. At the start of the year, he was criminally underrated by the media. And I think we've seen with his absence how much he means to our team in leadership, offensively, defensively. And he has that ability to draw people into him and be able to bring out the best, of their ability around him. So having Arby back, I don't think we can underestimate what he has done, not only for this club on the field, but off the field. So, having him back is just a massive in, particularly against the Bulldogs, who got that big forward pack, and we've got to dominate through that middle, and having Arby back there, it's a big in.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. He's also the co-captain.
Yeah.
And I think we sometimes forget that. Yeah. And, you know, both Arpi and Romy have got very, very different type of leadership styles, which really complements each other. So I think, you know, whilst we all want Arpi back, I think so does Romy. What I have noticed the most, and even spending time with him, is the way that he does lead that team, and he's very pragmatic. He's very clever in terms of the way that he gets the best out of the players. But he sets that defensive tone in that team, and he has so he'll be fresh as well. So you know this is gonna make an enormous impact on the group. And like I said, that's their captain, so they want to play for him, and you know they want him on that field, and so it's gonna be great.
Yeah, Rach, who needs to have a big game this week?
I'd like to see, and we've touched on it, with Arpi back, I want to see Luai now step up as well. People have been saying he's been playing poorly. It's so hard for him to lead that team around the park when we've had so many injuries out. It completely changes the spine and how they react. It completely changes your outside backs, and he's got to change his game style in order to combat all those changes that have been out. So having those players back and having Arpi back in there to help him with those leadership qualities that you were talking about, I think we could see Luai have a big game. And because it's against the Bulldogs as well, we saw what happened last year in the game against the Bulldogs. Luai really stepped up. I can see Luai really stepping up and having a great game this weekend.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think we will. I think we'll see that. I think that pressure will be relieved from that leadership perspective as well. And you know, he's also that the first few, I think those first few rounds where we were very dangerous, very combative, that took a lot out of their bodies. That was really obvious to see when we were it was real obvious to see when we were sort of at the facility. They were battered. Including Romy. Like I think, it's been physically, it's taken a big toll on his body. So I think, so there'll be, having Arpi back, I think for him particularly, will be enormous to allow him to play, his very dangerous, confident style of footy. And it just rubs off on that entire team. Which will be very difficult for the Dogs to stop if they can build that momentum and play that really confident style of footy, which is what we saw in both attack and defence. And play for the full 80 minutes. So
for me, it's not somebody who I think needs to have a big game, but I am expecting a huge game out of Terrell after watching Origin last night and seeing the performance that those props put out there, knowing that he is a much more reliable, and like the average numbers that he puts out is far and above anywhere near those other two that were playing, or mostly. I know Saifidi didn't get game time yesterday, but he was named, which means that Laurie Daly was looking at him as a potential player. I think that's going to put a fire in Terrell's belly, and even if he doesn't get picked, it's only going to benefit us.
Absolutely.
Any key matchups that we need to be mindful of, Rach?
I think, we have to win the forward battle. We know the strike power the Bulldogs have out in the outside edges, and our back five have been changed so much this year. This lack in consistency, it's hard to build up those combinations. So I guess if we don't win that middle part of the game and give the Bulldogs too much space, I can see some tries from the Bulldogs being scored down there purely because we haven't had those combinations set up on our outside edges as much as we'd like to coming into the game.
Yeah. Anything that you can think of?
It'll be interesting, I guess, with that State of Origin time. It does always make it a bit tricky as well with players, either injured or not available. But I'm interested to see the Burton and Luai. Personally, the way they manage the game. So I'm really keen to see how those two go head to head.
Yeah, because Burton, even though he played last night, he only played a few minutes.
They brought him in far too late, I thought.
So it'll be expected that he plays a full game. Crichton depends on game management. It's only 3 days between Origin, but there's no travel, so that is an advantage. So it'll be interesting to see if they do put him out there. All right, score predictions.
Well, this is my favourite game of the year. So I've actually got us winning 18-8. Only because I could never, ever pick the Bulldogs to beat us. I can't do it. So 18-8.
I will get up, but I think it's going to be very close.
Yeah.
And it's going to be in the last, not as close as the State of Origin, in the last 5 seconds, but it's going to go right down to the wire.
We're the football.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Rach, I hate doing score predictions.
To do one.
So, and I hadn't done one before I left the house this afternoon. So I literally thought of it driving down the M7. And so I said, right, the next two-digit numbers that I see, that's going to be my score prediction. So an orange truck drove past me, which was an omen. And it had the number 38 on it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then the next number I saw was 11. I was like, all right.
Pick the score.
So maybe we're down 10-0 just before halftime. So they kick the field goal to put it to 11. And then we come back and score 38 points in the second half. So
I don't think that score's ever happened in an NRL.
No. So anyway, I'm sticking with it. And if it comes off, everybody, you're welcome.
Buy my ticket.
You're shouting Vegas if that
happens. Definitely. So this Saturday we have an ambush event before the game in the Northern Bar at Combank Stadium. Unfortunately, I won't be there, but you'll be there with the team, Rach. So once the gates open, head on into the Northern Bar just inside Gate B. We're still hoping that we'll have a guest from the club. We know that it's sometimes tricky with coordination and all those kinds of things, but we'll let you know on socials if we do have somebody that will be there. But it's a free event for all West Tigers supporters of all ages. So just come along. Rach and Mari will be on the door. Gary and Steve will be there from the Claws Out podcast. So come along before the game.
You don't have to be a member of the West Tigers Club. Like we know we've been asked questions before if you need to be a member of the West Tigers. As Kel said, it's free for everybody to come in. Any West Tigers fans, members and supporters.
That's right. And next week, Rach and I won't be in studio, but we will still have an episode for you on Thursday night. We have been very lucky to be invited to the NRLW season launch. So we are so excited to be attending that next Thursday, and we hope we can bring you some inside scoops from that as well. But Charmain, thank you so much for coming along this afternoon and sharing your insights into the women's game. Makes me even more excited for the start of the season now, knowing how much work you are putting in to the pathways and to the program, and now with Craig as well, Sandy, as you guys all call him. We haven't had the chance to meet him yet, so looking forward to meeting him at the launch next week, and hearing what his vision is for the girls as well. But I really, really enjoyed hearing your story today, and I hope any females that are out there listening are just inspired as I have been, and I'm sure Rach has been as well.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody, and so that's us from today, and we'll see you next week for episode 7.